Hey everyone, we're going to be making a loop animation today. What that means is we're going to create a character doing a really cool action over and over and over that can be repeated forever so that we can save ourselves a lot of time when we're animating. So normally animations run at about 24 frames per second, so that means for 1 second of animation you're doing 24 drawings. A loop is a good way to kind of animate your character and take up the time without having to redraw that character thousands of times. So the first thing I want to do when I'm making an animation is I want to really plan out what my action is going to be. So with this first frame, I drew out a series of pictures that kind of demonstrated a jump. So this is a step-by-step process showing how the person goes from standing all the way to a jumping position. Sometimes I find it's easier to kind of draw your character out as a stick person first. That way you can figure out what each of the body parts are supposed to be doing before you actually design the character. So the most important thing to think about when you're making your loop animation is that the ending pose and the starting pose need to be the same. The reason for this is if it's not the same, your character is going to be jumping and teleporting all around. So making sure that your character is doing the same thing in the beginning as they are at the end. So that means if I'm animating a jump and my character starts off standing, that means at the end of the jump they need to be standing in that exact same pose. Now if you want to make your characters more dynamic, the most important thing to do is making sure that you have a build-up to that pose or whatever the action is. So for example, if you're doing a jump, there's kind of like an anticipation where you're stretching the motions of the body. This really helps exaggerate the character and make it more dynamic when you're animating. So now it's the part you've all been waiting for, the actual action. So when you're doing the action, you really want to think about the process. So how does it actually work? How does it kind of get to the point that it's at? So for example, if I had my character jumping and he started off standing, then all of a sudden he was in the air, if I didn't do anything to show the process, it would just look like he teleported from the ground and kind of flew up into the air. And that makes no sense. So your character's already done the build-up, they've already done the action, now they're stuck up in the air. How do they get back to that beginning pose? So whenever you're animating your character doing an action and you want to make it a loop, you want to figure out how they're going to get back to that original point. So for the case of my jump, I need to show how my character lands and then goes back into that standing pose. Now for your viewing pleasure, I've actually acted out some bad examples of jumping. So the reason why these would be considered a bad example is because I am doing no build-up whatsoever, my legs are barely moving. When I'm jumping, I kind of have my arms and legs very stiff, I've got no bend to it, and it just looks really weird. So now going back to the point that we made about really stretching up that build up to the pose, I really want to think about how I can make my pose more dynamic and how I can act that out. So this pose is way more dynamic because I built it up, I jumped way up high in the air, so high that my head got cut out of the frame, and then I landed and went back to that neutral pose, obviously as best I could in person. So now that we've kind of figured out what we want our character to be doing and kind of the process of that action, now we have to actually think about what our character is going to look like. So it's really good to kind of come up with a bunch of different character concepts and try and make your character as simple as possible because you're going to be drawing this character over and over. If you make your character way too complex, it's going to take forever to draw it as an animation. So there's actually a neat little trick you can do using a window to get your drawings to line up with one another. If you have your drawings kind of in different locations on your page, once again, when you record the animation or if you make the flip book, it's going to make it look like your character is jumping all over the place. So if you use this method, you can actually make sure that your characters are kind of all in the same spot on the page. I can hang my drawing up on the window and put a fresh piece of paper over it, and I can still see the previous drawing when I'm drawing over it. So if I put a drawing on the window, I can trace my other drawings. For my example, I drew a guy eating a sandwich. Now this is what all of my pictures look like together before I animate them. It helps to write the frame number on the bottom of each drawing so that you know which order you're actually going to animate them in. So there's two ways you can turn this into an animation. One, you can make a flipbook by stapling all of your pictures together, or you can choose to take pictures of your animations using a stop motion program. I'd recommend I Can Animate if you have a Samsung or Android phone, or if you have an Apple product like an iPhone or iPad, I would recommend using Stop Motion Studio. Both of these programs are free and they're actually pretty easy to use. So to actually use the animation programs, first thing you need to do is click on the red plus sign on the bottom right of the screen. This will open up a new file for your animation, so you might be seeing nothing at first, but to actually start taking pictures of your animation, click on the camera signal on the right side. If you need to delete or double any of your frames, click on the left side where there's a series of pictures. If you want to record audio for your animation, click the bottom left picture of a microphone. Now the final step is to take pictures of all the drawings that you made, making sure that you take them in the correct order. The stop motion program will automatically turn them into a stop motion animation. If you find that your animation's too choppy or moving too fast, I would suggest either drawing more frames or using the duplicate tool found on the left side of the screen of your program. So in conclusion, whenever you're making an animation, you really want to think about the process of how that character is getting to the action that they're doing. If you're making a loop animation, you really want to make sure that your character is finishing off where they started. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video. Bye-bye.